The recent release of Heat in 4K has generated more requests for me to review a 4K than any other film. Initially I think it was just because people were excited that it was coming out in 4K, but since then it seems to have generated a reputation for being too dark. As a result, I think I've scrutinised this one more than any other 4K so far, so keep watching to find out more. Those of you who have been watching my channel for some time know that I prefer to get my discs from HMV and FOP whenever possible. This copy of Heat came from the Bath HMV. It was a good excuse to visit Bath and go into that new Bath store. It's not as big as the previous one, which was set over 3 floors. It's a bit different. It's similar to the Newbury store, which I've featured previously, and there's all sorts of memorabilia in there, but there is a very good physical media section of movies, and there's also a very nice section of 4K movies. Now, it's interesting that when I went in to get Heat, there were a couple of copies on the shelves, but when I came to leave, I thought I'll just go and get a shot of the remaining copies of Heat on the shelf. They were all gone, so in the space of 3/4 of an hour, they've managed to sell out in Bath, and that may be a situation that's repeated across the country. Let's hope so, despite this reputation for being too dark. Now let's get into that, because I saw this film in January 1996 at a little cinema in Dillon, Colorado, and I well remember one particular sequence where Robert De Niro's character is acting as lookout during the robbery, and the police are looking at him through heat-seeking cameras. It's quite a famous sequence, and I remember peering into the darkness of that image to try and make out what was going on. You could barely see Robert De Niro's character, and that's interesting because for me, this 4K disc on that sequence looks exactly the same as I remember it. Having said that, a lot of this film is set at night, and even when it's not, it's often got that sort of muted look that is perhaps suggesting that something is not quite right with the transfer. Without having a 35mm print to check it against, it's not possible to be categoric, but my impression is that it was shot this way. There's a clue towards the end of the film when De Niro's car goes into a tunnel, and we go from perhaps being too dark to being overexposed. A filmmaking accident perhaps, but it looks great, and I think that's an indication that all is as it should be. To get a better idea of how accurate the transfer from the 35mm original is, I ran the Blu-ray, which does not look as good as the 4K. HDR once again giving superior colour, and I also then ran the 4K but turned the HDR off, which looked awful. I then looked at the making of on the bonus disc in the hope that this carryover from previous releases would show us clips from the film as it appeared on the DVD. Now, unless someone has remastered these clips to match the new 4K transfer, then I think it's fairly safe to assume that the DVD looked very similar to the new 4K. Next, I watched quite a bit of the 4K on my telly, and certainly on here, if people hadn't have told me they thought Heat was too dark, I don't think I would have even thought about it. There is a sequence about an hour into the film where the police and their families meet up at a bar or restaurant, and I might have thought there that things were a little too dark, but I'm not watching a film in a cinema as I did in January 96. I'm watching it at home on domestic equipment. There is a difference. And maybe that difference is the film has got better contrast levels than our domestic equipment at home. I expect this was graded in a studio on professional equipment, and it looks to me like it was graded to match as closely as possible the original 35mm prints. Now, inevitably there are going to be differences from shot to shot or in the odd shot here and there, but overall I think the editors and the graders have done an exceptional job of trying to reproduce a dark film as I saw it all those years ago. Now, that is the only time I've seen Heat previously until this 4K release, so I haven't seen any possible low contrast transfers to VHS, DVD, Laserdisc in all those intervening years, so nothing else to muddy the waters. And as I said, this 4K transfer does to me seem to resemble what I saw at that cinema in Dillon, Colorado in January 1996. The aspect ratio is approximately 2.40 to 1 and the sound is DTS 5.1. Just listen to the famous gunfight sequence in Los Angeles to find out how good that sound really is. The definition is variable throughout because of the dark nature of the film. That doesn't lend itself well to having great definition, but for the most part the definition is good to very good, so you won't have any quibbles from me as to the picture quality on Heat. But because of our domestic equipment and all our equipment being different, we will find that many of us do think that Heat is too dark. It's a hard-hitting film, there's some bad language, and it runs for 2 hours and 50 minutes. In the cinema in '96 I found that it dragged a bit, but now that I know that the famous gunfight sequence is not the climax of the film, it didn't drag at all, and I think you'll probably find the same. Now, with the release of Dune on 4K, the recent release of Dune, we had a great discussion in the comments on my review for that one as to the dark nature of that film. The upshot of all that discussion was that even some cinemas were displaying different results. Some were too dark, some were not too dark, and it looks like we've got the same thing all over again here with Heat. Some of our systems will be too dark, others will be perfect, or maybe not so perfect. But I can't give it a full recommendation on that basis because it is going to be variable, but there's no doubting this is a very good film. Some people love it. It's gone down as a bit of a masterpiece. If you like cops and robbers, you like a bit of violence, and you like great acting with a great cast, then I don't think you'll be too disappointed with Heat. Just be prepared that some scenes you may be thinking are too dark, but just assume you're back in a cinema in 1996 and you should be peering into the darkness to try and see what is going on. Now, as I said, I got this from the Bath branch of HMV. This is a new branch because the previous one in Bath did close down. I think it was the beginning of the year, and this new shop opened a week later. It's a great achievement. They've put it right on the high street again. Bath is a lovely place to visit, so if you're ever there, please do pop into the HMV there. Spend plenty of money on discs and music and all sorts of other memorabilia, and I was tempted because they had some fabulous alien statuettes and things, and I hadn't seen this one of the Sulaco from Aliens. I'd certainly seen the space jockey around, but not this Sulaco ship. But fortunately I left with my wallet still intact, only came away with Heat on this occasion, having spent way too much in the Newbury HMV a few weeks earlier. But it's a lovely shop to walk around. They've got masses of Blu-rays, DVDs and a good selection of 4Ks. There's loads of records, and once again I was tempted by the soundtracks section and that James Bond triple disc. Oh dear, what was that, £60 almost? It could have caused me to go and see the bank manager, but I managed to resist once more. Just have to hope I don't see that record in another branch of HMV like I did with Blade Runner when I resisted in the Newbury HMV and then grabbed it a few weeks later in FOP in central London. But a great store again. There's some lovely things to look at in there. It's not all music and film now. There's other things as well, and that's got to be a good sign for the future that Sunrise Records, the new owners of HMV, are attempting to build these stores to survive into the future. So hopefully an outlet on our high streets that is going to survive for many years to come and help to fuel the home movie market that does seem to be seeing a bit of a resurgence now. And judging by the comments I get, many people out there are investing in 4K equipment just to purchase these 4K discs. The only other thing I'll report before I go is that Clark in Australia, his video of the lacing up of the 70mm of Lawrence of Arabia in the Sydney Ritz, I believe it is going extremely well. He's getting a lot of views and he seems to be getting a lot of feedback. So any of us film enthusiasts, that's another one to take a look at. And it looks like he's going to be getting a 35mm of Back to the Future. So we'll all keep our fingers crossed on that. Nothing is promised, but I think that'll be another successful video and one we're all going to enjoy if Clark manages to get into the projection box for that one. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like and perhaps consider subscribing so I'll be encouraged to carry on producing content like this again in the future. Until the next video, bye bye for now.